Hey everyone, and welcome back to Afrodo Reviews. And on this channel, I help you decide, does that book deserve a streamline and a croissant? Or does it deserve the fiery lakes of Mustafar? She'll stop eventually. What are you doing there? Today's book is Ahsoka. Now, Ahsoka was a novel written by E.K. Johnston as part of the Disney-era New Canon books, first released on October 11th of 2016, 2 years after Netflix released The Clone Wars with its additional 6th season. This is relevant due to the fact that this was written within that odd transition period between when they couldn't quite decide if the Clone Wars animated series was completely canon or not. And the story itself takes place after Order 66, with heavy references to the show. However, based on what I could find, she was given certain directions involving how she could write the book. Specifically, the scenes from The Mandalorian Siege. As the production was currently awaiting the 7th season, and it was already in progress, Johnston was told after she was approached to write this book that she wasn't allowed to write. She wasn't allowed to give any detail on The Mandalorian Siege when she put it in the book. In any case, the story was meant to tell the transitional period from Ahsoka leaving the Jedi Order and becoming Fulcrum in Rebels. But before I get too deep into this, let's go ahead and roll with the ratings. And let's move on to the cover. Now this cover, it's fine and good. It's drawn, which is a bonus, featuring an aged-up Ahsoka front and center, with 2 lightsabers before her. I'm not too good on my Rebels lore in terms of the animated series, so I'm not sure if this was made before or after she was revealed to be Fulcrum. I apologize if I'm spoiling that for anyone, by the way. This might be the first occasion we see of Ahsoka being aged up. Now, Ahsoka stands here with 2 lightsabers before her. It's a serviceable cover, if a bit simple. Unlike Kenobi, I wouldn't say this is quite appropriate for the story, as while Kenobi, the book, embraced the simple nature of its story, Ahsoka is a little more complicated and a much higher staked plot. But overall, it's fine. Actually, truth be told, the one thing I wanted to joke about this cover is, and this goes by extension to Kenobi as well, is, you ever notice how 90% of the EU books that feature Jedi as characters almost always have the Jedi on the cover with the lightsaber out? It's something I started to notice with these books specifically, because I remember thinking to myself that for someone that's meant to be hiding, it is kind of weird that they're all out there just waving their lightsabers like... But then I look back and I realized that this was true of almost every book with a Jedi as the main character. Rogue Planet, Cestus Deception, Kenobi, even my Thrawn trilogy has it, like the original covers too. So, and I think it's a little funny. Like, the stories think we won't realize the Jedi are Jedi because they're not waving around the laser swords. You know what I mean? Especially when they're using like very well-known characters like Luke or Obi-Wan. Anyways, let's go on to the synopsis. Now, like normal for the past month now, I've gone back to reading the stories on a TBR. And because of this, I would like to say that if you want to see how the book presents itself, or presents the story within, check it out in my TBR. There's the thing, or I think it would be over here. One of the two. But for context on this review, a quick synopsis is thus. This book follows Ahsoka after surviving Order 66 as she attempts to evade the Empire, and does her best to blend into normal society. But due to a good Jedi nature, she can't help but feel herself drawn into conflicts to help people, thus endangering her own safety and bringing the Empire's attention to her. And yeah, that's kind of the extent of it. And yes, I know what you're thinking. This sounds like a young adult version of Kenobi, but, using Ahsoka instead. And yeah, that actually is kind of true. I don't mean that lightly. It literally feels like a Kenobi knockoff, just dumbed down to a young adult audience. Now, obviously, the story is a bit different in places. Ahsoka is more willing to form relationships with the community as opposed to Obi-Wan in his story. The conflict is a bit more extreme as it endangers the entire moon Ahsoka is hiding out on, and all of its inhabitants, and it eventually ends with Ahsoka, obviously, joining the Rebel Alliance in an assumed name. But the beats are there, and it's not hard to find where I think Johnston got a lot of her inspiration from when she wrote this book. No, but I will say one of the things that did catch me off guard is that this is a young adult novel. In hindsight, this probably shouldn't surprise me. I mean, it is a prequel novel to the Rebels series and a sequel novel to the Clone Wars animated series, which, in theory, was a kid's show. But I do find myself a little disappointed when I opened the novel and I found out that this 300-page novel was only that many because the lines were double spaced. There's a lot of gap between the words, and because of that, it does give the impression of an artificial inflation of the sizes of the novel. Especially when you have like these little flashback chapters too. But the reason I harp on this point of it being a young adult novel is that it unfortunately falls into what a lot of people call the young adult novel trappings. Now, I don't really have that much of an issue with young adult novels. I think they're good, and, back when I was a young adult, I read the crap out of them. And there are definitely very good young adult novels that have definitely withstood the test of time. If you want an example, just go check out a lot of my nostalgic reevaluation series. Or one I read when I was older is a Dark Life book by Cat Falls. Excuse me there. Which was a very young adult novel, but I think was a well-written young adult novel that I enjoyed it as a full adult. But when people say that young adult novels have... There's like certain tropes to young adult novels. There's a certain way to say, oh, this is a young adult novel when you read it. Is that there's like certain trappings that they fall in that I think make the story lesser. For example, a lot of the things the Empire does in this book is merely evil for the sake of evil. A lot of the, don't get me wrong, the Empire is definitely evil in the other books and the shows. But in this case, the Empire is doing stuff simply because it's the evil option.
You're not going to shoot a puppy, are you, Jack? Yeah, in the face. Why?
Like, there's no merit behind it. It's not talking like, oh, this character is abusing his authority as an Imperial governor to do it, but it's not technically what the Empire is telling him to do. Like you see in a lot of the shows and stuff when they want to be obviously evil. Or you don't see them like, okay, we're doing this evil thing, but it's towards this higher goal. In addition, a lot of the characters are a lot more one-dimensional than I felt they could have been, with most being able to be summed up with about a couple words as opposed to a full sentence. Ahsoka is obviously the main exception to this, but that's only because she has a rich history to already pull from at the start of this book. Most of the characters who get names that are introduced in this book mostly exist to be sympathetic fodder, killed off so we understand the gravity of the situation, with only about a couple surviving to the end of the book, and by extension of that, they're the ones that you might need a full sentence to describe. The book itself, and by extension, I keep using by extension, don't I? The book itself and many of its parts are a lot less mature because of that. Another thing is the book and, many of its parts are also a lot less mature because it's being presented to a young adult audience. For example, I found it really hard to believe that Ahsoka Tano, of all people, doesn't understand the concept of a found family and has to have it explained to her. There's also the fact that the timescale moves way too fast. The book opens with Ahsoka fleeing one of her hiding spots because Imperials came over and trying to go to an even more remote hiding spot. Specific attention is brought to the fact that she did her best to keep a distance from everyone and chiding herself over letting herself being drawn in even a little before resolving to become even more elusive in this next place. Except by page 132, she's not only accepted into the community as an outstanding member and is willing to stay despite heavy Imperial presence popping up, while also requiring the bare minimum convincing to hang out with Kaden and her friends. Hell, even the radicalization of the moon Rada's inhabitants happened rather swiftly in comparison to the amount we've read. While the Empire is basically being the biggest dickheads in the galaxy that they can be from the start, I don't necessarily blame them. The Empire barely feels like it's been there a day or two before people are like,
Kill them all! Yeah! Oh yeah! Yeah! Oh yeah!
Now, I say this because one of the problems with that is this book relies on you already having a distinct hatred of the Empire. Now, I definitely have said that before, there are certain books you have to go in with some prior knowledge. If you're going into Ahsoka, you probably should have some prior knowledge of who the character is. But this book relies on it a little too much in that regard. Plus, from where Ahsoka's story had ended at the point this book had been written, the Empire wasn't an entity yet. Even in the original trilogy, the Empire wasn't this heinously evil, I guess I should say. I mean, I say that, but one of the first things the Empire does is blow up a planet, so, you know, point being. I think the book would have been better if it had been a bit longer, less double-spaced. Taking its time, like Kenobi did, to really establish the people and what they stand for and who they are, before it starts trying to pull at our heartstrings by having them lead a really bad rebellion against the Empire, where most get slaughtered just to show us the danger. By the end of the day, the only character from Rada you might be able to connect to is Kaden, who receives the most focus, and somewhat through her little sister, who she does everything to protect. That's because no character apart from Kaden and Ahsoka really have a voice. They all sort of speak the same, think the same, say the same things from a reader's perspective, and that more or less makes them the same for all intents and purposes. The only one I briefly thought was going to separate herself was Nira, who looked like she was going to become this cynical rebel with a death wish near the end, but she, dies right after that, so it was kind of a wasted opportunity. I don't even necessarily mean this just for the good guys either. There's a character we introduced called Toblane. It's probably Toblane because he's got two B's. Who is initially set up to be the asshole character, a drunk who gets mean and angry with people really easily. The way the story sets him up initially, you think that he's going to be a big problem later. Sort of like Sloane from the Inheritance Cycle. You know, maybe he would be on the good guy side at first, but he'd be the quickest to roll over when things start getting tough. Or he's the one who's actually actively, let's Imperial for life kind of people. So he's the one who sells out Ahsoka when he learns who she is, or finds out that the little rebellion's being planned. Or maybe he sells out Kaden, which led to the botched bombing run by her in Vortan. No, Vortan. Yeah, I think it was Vortan. Or possibly sells them out in an attempt to, get some bounty for drinking money after they go into hiding, thus leading to Kaden's capture. In the end, he just gets drunk, throws a punch at the Imperials, and is promptly executed for it to show how awful the Imperials are. Also, small note, but thank God Samuel L. Jackson was in the prequels, because if he wasn't, I genuinely don't know how the writers of the EU would have been able to describe black people. This is the second book this month I've read where someone is describing as having skin like Master Windu's. And that made me laugh a little. The book also sort of teeters back and forth on this one-sided romantic subplot. I had heard that this book had an LGBT element in it, and it does certainly do that, as Kate and friends teeter about the potential crush she has on Ahsoka. But the thing is, by the narrative of the book, I don't actually know if she did have a crush, or there was just a slight attraction there that she never really acknowledged beyond, oh, it's there. I can see a hot girl on the street and be attracted to her, but I wouldn't say I have a crush on her. You know what I mean? There's nothing there that I felt like anything stronger than good friends. And apart from a joke near the middle where Kaden claims she could kiss Ahsoka for saving her life and catching Ahsoka off guard with a comment, it's hard to tell if that was meant to be the extent of it, since we know Ahsoka shows up in the Rebels underneath Fulcrum and without Kaden nearby. It was definitely doomed to be the one-sided crush that it is, but I don't know, I just would have killed for some more moments of that obvious, crush that she has, or maybe Ahsoka being forced to explore things she hadn't before because of the Jedi Order. One of the interesting things I was hoping for with Ahsoka that I knew Obi-Wan wasn't going to do, is Ahsoka branching out from her teachings of the Jedi Order. After all, from when she left the Jedi Order, one of the things that she had a problem with was the Jedi Order was kind of falling. She didn't believe in its code anymore. So maybe I would have seen her doing like what Luke was supposed to do, and start thinking of ways to be a Jedi while overcoming the failings of the previous system. But in addition, another thing that I had an issue with this is the antagonists aren't very good. We do have two main ones. The first is a character named Jenneth Pilar, an Imperial consultant officer. At first I thought he was an officer, but later on when he's packing up and leaving the moon, he makes it like he's a consultant for the Empire rather than someone who's actively in the, in their ranks. So he basically aims the Empire at Rada to grow their new crop, and seems obsessed with the mathematical numbers of what's involved, up to and including the death of the workers. He also seems to take an automatic pleasure in the harm he causes, despite all other aspects of his personality being dictated by a mathematical logic. So it was a little weird, honestly, there. And then there's the sixth brother.
To me and expect Imperial favor.
He's not much better in terms of character. He's given a bunch of build-up about why he's so dangerous, with not much character to go beyond him. Beyond that, I guess I should say. Not him. You'd think he'd serve at least an interesting physical challenge if he didn't really have much of a personality. But much like the actual episode of Tales of the Jedi, Ahsoka handles him with relative ease. While it's forgivable in Tales of the Jedi due to the short amount of runtime, the book dedicates several chapters to him, so it comes off way more anticlimactic this time around. Actually, in Tales of the Jedi, I would argue that it's a more badass scene for Ahsoka, showing that despite the Inquisitor's threats and rebels, they don't really stand a chance against someone who's been actually trained like Darth Maul or Ahsoka did, like as far as I remember from the show. But this kind of circles back around to my next point. Ahsoka confuses me a bit in the middle. You see, when she rescues Kaden from the Empire, Kaden urges Ahsoka to flee the planet because she knows that Jenneth Pilar is searching for Ahsoka and would do anything to capture her. Ahsoka leaves, but promises to come back with help. Except she doesn't. She just kind of leaves and goes back to the life she had before she came to Rada, and it's only after she goes on a somewhat decently written journey of self-discovery, as she realizes she still loves helping people across the galaxy, does she decide that she's going to go back and help. In addition, despite the urging of Kaden and the absolutely sure nature that the narrative tells us to have, that Pilar is going to hunt Ahsoka to the best of their abilities, he doesn't seem to give half a shit in the novel itself. Nothing he does after Kaden escapes implies that he's trying to capture Ahsoka, or he really wants to capture Ahsoka and raise through the ranks or anything. He's just, I'm going to report there's a Jedi. My drop's here, done. That's the extent of it. He is solely concerned with getting his crop from the farmers above all else. Even to the point that while he makes a point of noting that he should go explore nearby hills in the settlement, which is where the Rod and rebels end up hiding while Ahsoka's gone, he just doesn't for some reason. Like, that was a blatant case of plot armor for me, is because, like, they keep saying, oh, you know what? If there's going to be any rebellion or anything hiding, it's going to be in those hills over there. I should get something together and scout it. Tomorrow. And that's like basically everything. It's like the worst case of procrastination. In any case, I think I'm going to have to give this book a 6 out of 10. I know. I'm sure many fans of this book are ready to pitchfork me for this rating, but I just personally couldn't find what all that hype was. What all the hype behind this book was really about. I really did want to like this book, and anyone who watched the Star Wars tag I made would be able to tell you that Ahsoka is one of my favorite characters in Star Wars canon in general. I was a little disappointed, though, when I found a mostly unrewarding book to read through. One of the characters felt like they had much of a presence, and it, again, falls into a lot of the bad trappings of young adult novels. And, you know, maybe a part of that is I hyped the book too much in my head. And so when I got to the actual product, it sort of fell a lot flatter than I was hoping. But still, and I did mention in my TBR, this book no longer fits nicely into the canon anymore. Basically, what few parts of the Siege of Mandalore that Johnston did squeeze into the book has definitely been retconned by the 7th season of the Clone Wars. The Tales of the Jedi would come out later and then use this premise to make its own short episode on it. And while I did praise it a little bit with the use of the Sixth Brother, it was far less interesting than this novel and basically retconned everything about the novel. The episode kind of combines the Fardas plot and the Errata plot, and I think they turned Caden into a boy, which has some annoying implications I'm not going to discuss right now. All in all, not a terrible book, and it's definitely something probably suited for a much younger audience, but for me, I found it to be rather lackluster, at least so far as I was hoping it was going to be. Yeah, I think that made sense. But the question of whether or not it deserves the Lake of Mustafar. Nah. I mean, like I said, it's a young adult novel, and while I did have a fair amount of problems with it, nothing about it was so bad that I just didn't want to read the book anymore. Plus, without being in the target audience, my opinion on if it's a good book should definitely be taken with a grain of salt. I'm not... So, that was awkward. Anyways, at the age of, like, 20, in my late 20s, I probably don't have much of a say on what's a good young adult novel. So, with that being said, just remember, with every book comes an adventure, and every adventure is worth having. Especially this next one. Ooh, I'm so excited to read it. See you later, everyone.